On a railway, there is no bigger safety-critical role than being a signaller. Even at the start of the railways, working and ensuring the points were correct were critical into keeping the railway running. Over time, changing the points and maintaining the signals became the job of a dedicated person who was specially trained. Now, I hate the phrase, "a monkey can do your job," and it's a phrase I very rarely use. But in this case, the phrase is quite literal. So this amazing story starts in 1877 in South Africa. James Wilde was a shunter, guard and railway worker working for the Cape government. James loved his job, but he took little regard for his own safety. He would often be seen jumping from train to train in order to do his job quicker. He was a skilled worker, but instead of reprimanding him for his lack of safety, many would praise him, even going as far as giving him the nickname of Jumper. Unfortunately, his complacency would get the best of him, and one day, as he was working, he slipped and fell onto the tracks. He was unable to react as he fell into the path of an 80-ton train. The driver could do nothing to stop in time. James survived the encounter, but with terrible injuries. Both of his legs were crushed, and James had no choice but to watch them be amputated below the knee. James was given splints to move, but there was no way he was able to perform his duties as a guard ever again. Despite the accident, James was still considered a valuable asset to the railway, and the railway couldn't bear to lose his skills. Moreover, it was also unlikely that James would be able to stop working, as there was little in the way of accident benefit pay. Once James had healed, he made prosthetics to help him walk, but he still found it difficult, so the government offered him the position of signalman in the hope he could sit down between trains and rest, and the majority of work could be undertaken from a chair. James took the position well and designed a bespoke trolley to help him travel to and from work. But the signal points are heavy and the levers were still too much for James. He needed help, but he simply couldn't ask the railway for an extra helper. Even though the railway was gracious enough to give him a job, they wouldn't be as obliging if he went to them to ask for help, and there was nothing to stop them rescinding his employment if they deemed him unfit. Unlike today, employers at that time were under no constraint to make accommodations for disabled employees. One day in 1881, James was visiting a local market for supplies. It was a busy day, but amongst the sellers, something caught James's eye. It was a small baboon. Seeing baboons in the market was nothing new. Many were sold as pets, and they were taught to dance and entertain the locals for pennies. But this baboon was different. He was driving a cart. James spoke to the owner. He said that the baboon was very bright and would obey commands in exchange for food and a tot of Cape brandy every night. It was then that James had a brilliant idea and begged the man to sell the baboon to him. The owner agreed, and James named the baboon Jack. The next day, Jack's training began. James taught him how to sweep the floors and take out the rubbish, and how to push the trolley to take him to and from work. The idea was to allow Jack to help James with the smaller chores, so James would be less tired on the levers. But it was obvious Jack wanted to learn more. He started to learn the audio cues the engines gave and understood what each whistle meant and which lever to pull. It was unintentional, but James was teaching Jack more than he anticipated, and the smart little animal was picking things up. One day, as James was working, Jack decided he wanted to try the levers for himself. James, curious, let him. Due to Jack's ability to grab the lever, Jack made short work of it. Jack was also adept at token exchanges, with a curious look from the very surprised drivers. Over time, both Signaller and Baboon developed a very close bond. When not working, Jack rarely left James's side. Jack performed his work flawlessly and was a popular hit with the other workers. It wasn't every day you see a baboon working the lines, and the drivers loved him. Some, however, were not as pleased. One passenger who had seen Jack was appalled that an animal was in control of their safety and reported both James and Jack to the board. The board took a dim view of letting Jack control the signals, and James was fired on the spot. James was dismayed. Not only had he lost his job, but one of the most reliable workers he had ever met was gone with him. James rallied his workers and begged the board to reinstate both him and Jack. Jack had a spotless record and he was always supervised, and James felt it was callously unfair to dismiss him. The board was unsure, so James asked them to give the Baboon a test, a competency test undertaken by most signallers. The employers decided to humour James, and so they agreed. If he failed, then both would be given their marching orders. The inspector went to the signals where Jack and James were waiting. The inspector gave the Baboon a very complex test of differing audio signals, and he noted the Baboon's behaviour. Jack didn't miss a single lever, and the inspector observed a token exchange without fault. After a full day of working, even the inspector had to concede this Baboon had passed the test better than some signallers. From that day on, Jack was an official employee of the Cape Government Railway, and under James's care he worked there for 9 years, never once making a mistake. He was given a simple salary, 20 cents, food rations, and included a bottle of beer on a Saturday. James passed away in 1890 after suffering a bout of TB. Both James and the railway were devastated. Rather than burying Jack, it was decided that his skull was preserved and takes pride of place in the Albany Museum in Grahamstown. James's trolley was also preserved and is on display at the Railway Museum in Uitenhage. Service animals were actually around in Jack's time, and I do believe that this is the first time a baboon was encouraged to be one. There are a lot of ethical questions surrounding the using of a wild animal in this way, and yes, I agree. Baboons are not domesticated like cats and dogs and should never be used in this manner. But Jack was different. He never wore a collar or a chain, and he could have left at any point, but he didn't. Even when the work was done, Jack was happy to lay by James's side. So while it's wrong by today's standards and baboons should never be used in this manner, I do take consolation that Jack had a seemingly happy life and seemed really content.